Hello once again, chess enthusiasts. I'm about to present to you what is effectively the final installment in the USSR series of problems. It all began with the first video that I presented on this, covering a magazine that was published in the Soviet Union as it was at that time in February 1977. And there we have the English version and the Russian version. I've already touched on this magazine a little bit in the first video to do with the problems, and I did promise that I'd give a bit of a cursory rundown at some future point. Well, here it is. This magazine is a very interesting publication, and it begins on page number 2, really, and it's a rundown of a good cross-section of famous players at the time giving their opinions on Soviet chess. And as you can see, there are comments here by Hort, Pomar, Larsen, Portish, Timon, Gligorich, Naidorf and O'Kelly. Now, the one by Miguel Naidorf, after whom the Naidorf variation of the Sicilian defense is named, is very interesting. I'll just read it out to you. I'm very fond of visiting the Soviet Union. The most creative chess atmosphere reigns in your country. It is always a pleasure to meet Soviet grandmasters. And so, although the Soviet Union has not had a very good reputation down the years, and it has faced quite a bit of criticism, as far as chess is concerned, I think that it reached a stage where you would have to say that prior to the advent of technology, it was absolutely supreme. It was a hegemony, effectively, of World Championship chess from 1948, when Botvinnik captured the title, to 1972, when Spassky was dethroned by a certain Robert James Fischer. But this magazine also, as we move along to page number 3, there was a very interesting article here by Yuri Averbakh, a late chess grandmaster of the Soviet Union. And I'll just read out the first paragraph of Averbach's article here because it is very interesting. Soviet chess made its first move in 1924 when what was called the Chess and Drafts section of the USSR was founded, and when chess became part of the system of Soviet physical education. This new organization faced new tasks. Already at the dawn of the workers' and peasants' government, the Communist Party attached exceptional importance to making physical recreation and sport part of the life of the people. That was when the slogan "Spread chess to every working chess family" and "Spread chess among the masses" were put forward. Now, Averbakh here is touching on the very fact that you need recreation. And I have already made this comment in a previous video that you need downtime. Technology is all very well and good, and you can't do without it in the 21st century. This is a fact, and everyone has become so used to it that it is indispensable. But I think just going back for nearly 46 years, I would have to agree with the Soviet approach in all of this. And I think that what is useful to note in all of this also is that there was no question of any technology coming to the assistance of any of these players whatsoever. Now, whilst technology is very useful, and it is useful also in chess, just to verify your findings more than to actually go in and find out the answers before the event, is a good way of doing it. But I think that people like Averbakh would have agreed that it is preferable to do it on your own merits and with other people rather than with machines necessarily. It was an amazing period, really, because as it touches on here, the ancient and yet eternally youthful game of chess is a national pastime in this country, where more than 4 million organized players of all ages regularly compete in tournaments. And like it points out below, and I've just read out the first paragraph, Yuri Averbakh, president of the Soviet Chess Federation, talks about chess in the Soviet Union, its organizational structure and the large-scale tournaments. So I think what can be seen from this, it's not surprising that the Soviet Union did have such a domination of chess pre-technology. Not so now, of course, but pre-technology it certainly did, and there's no doubt that its people embraced it to the full. And we now perhaps can be the beneficiaries by looking back just that little bit in time and seeing what it was really all about. And as can be seen here, the chess, the Russian, or what subsequently became the Soviet mindset, was governed around it. And again, it goes on to develop on what I've just read out to you. There are 1,620 workers' chess clubs in the Soviet Union. Hundreds of thousands of people spend leisure hours there. Now, chess is very good for developing the mind, whether it's through studying openings, middle games, particularly endgames in my opinion, and the solving of chess puzzles. And that's what really interested me in trying to get to the bottom of a lot of these puzzles in here. I believe I've solved most of them, if not all of them, correctly. And my intention really was to get a pass mark. If I could solve 6 out of the 12, I'd be very pleased. And I think I'm correct in saying that I have at least the first 9 correct, which would give me a 75%, which is pretty good going, and I'm well satisfied with that. And if anyone can do as well as that, or even better, congratulations. Just moving on, I'm not going in any way, shape or form. And here we have continuing chess, the Botvinnik school, as it points out here. And here is Mikhail Botvinnik there, in a recently taken photograph of the time. Over 5 million school children take part in children's and juniors competitions every year. So it was fierce competition. And there was no doubt that Botvinnik, one of the greatest players of all time, but one of the greatest tutors of all time. And he could come back from defeat, as he did against Smyslov and then against Tal. And then he bowed out, and he has to be regarded, in my opinion, as one of the all-time greats in both fields of practical play and in theory. Very interesting character who had a fairly long life. He died, I think, aged 84, so he had a very good innings indeed. And there are more interesting pictures here. Giving a rundown on certain sports personalities of the time. Students who are members of the chess club at Moscow University. There's a Colombian gentleman there, there's one from the Soviet Union, of course, one from Vietnam, one from Poland. So, and here we have a picture of a very young John F. Kennedy Jr. Like it points out here, son of the late US President. He's visiting Moscow University at the chess club. So it's very interesting. This article here to do with Anatoly Karpov is very interesting and well worth considering. Giving some of the background on this great player. He's not on my list of 16 of the greatest chess players of all time, but he's pretty close to it. And when drawing up a list, it's always subjective, of course, and many would agree with a lot of my selections, many would disagree with some of them, and that's their prerogative, as it is mine. But I think the Russian school that was really started with Dr. Alexander Alekhine, when he captured the Soviet championship in 1920, I believe he must be ranked as the first Soviet champion. And it had a very long life. And this is a game that I've already touched on in a previous video, Karpov against Boris Spassky, and all the annotations are by Karpov. As you can see here, it's in the descriptive notation, which more or less came to an end a long time ago. They even used the KT for knight. Even in my very young years, we'd already changed to N for knight. In fact, as far back as the 1930s, I remember Cecil Purdy in his book to do with the 1937 World Chess Championship, he'd already made a point of emphasizing that N would be used for knight throughout his book. So the letter N for knight does go back a long way, and it is necessary in order to avoid confusion with K for king. KT for knight, it's a little bit too close to K for king. Just to have a quick look at the Soviet edition of this, and just go to the same page. The game again, Karpov against Spassky. As can be seen, it is in the algebraic notation, but with the Russian letters for the pieces. And of course all the annotations are in Russian. This is why, for anyone who doesn't have a good knowledge of Russian, the English version is essential. And it gives further details here of aspects during the Soviet period. Chess and self-development, chess and self-improvement. And our problems, of course, we mustn't overlook you guys. Now this is an interesting picture here. It's a former world women's chess champion, Nona Gaprindashvili. She was probably the successor to Vera Menchik, who was a great player in the 1930s and played in men's tournaments. She was probably to be regarded as the first woman who had a pretty good standing against men, and I believe she beat one or two famous players like Sir George Thomas. I think found himself on the receiving end of a loss against her. When Capablanca played her, of course, chivalry did not obtain, and Nona had to turn over her king, but I think most have had to turn over their kings against Kappa down the years, so it's no disgrace. And like it says here, women's chess Georgian phenomenon, that's Nona, and more than 100,000 women play chess in the Soviet Union. So again, they include a grandmaster, 31 international masters, 66 USSR masters, and over 800 candidates. So when they talk about women in chess, they've clearly already established the position quite well, I would say, from this. And we're looking at the Tbilisi Palace of Chess there, the battle between Nona Alexandria and Nona Gaprindashvili, being watched by these ladies here, fellow chess experts. And they're continuing the article there about Nona. And here they give a rundown of the Soviet Union's world champions, of course, with Botvinnik there, and Smyslov, Tal, Petrosian, Spassky, and Karpov. You would have to, of course, add subsequently to this Kasparov and Kramnik, I guess, as well. And I would predate this with Alexander Alekhine. Clearly, he ought to be included in that list, but they haven't included him here. This is an interesting picture here of Mikhail Tal. What he's in fact doing here, let's just have a look at this. In the photograph above, we see Mikhail Tal during a transcontinental radio match in which his opponent was the Australian national team, and Tal won with a score 5.5 out of 2.5. So maybe one or two of his sacrifices didn't quite pay off there. Tal, a blisteringly attacking player, and he is on my list of the 16 greatest chess players of all time. Although it has to be said that Tal's sacrificial strategy, it has been put under close scrutiny in recent times, and it's proven to be not quite as accurate as many would have thought it had been. But his style of play is like a latter 20th century version of the coffee house player. And so he has excellent technique, and it's a convincing style that would have people over the board looking at their clock and thinking, what do I do here? And so in that respect, although his sacrifices may not have been quite as sound as had been previously thought, they are very good. So he is was one of the most effective players because of the uncertainty that he brought. he was a bringer of uncertainty, and he muddled minds, and I think that's the right way of looking at a player like Tal. He's a bit like the Jonah Lomu of All Black Rugby. He did it very well indeed, and so therefore he was, like Lomu, the most effective player on the park. Tal was probably the most effective player on the chessboard. And if you couldn't handle his sacrifices, then of course you'd be on a loss. Here we have an article covering 3 young players at the time, not so young now of course, but they certainly were then. They're Rafael Vaganyan, Yuri Balashov and Oleg Romanichin. Trio of young grandmasters on the threshold of creative maturity. I don't know whether these guys are still playing or not, but they certainly did very well, and there's an example of their games here. So, all very interesting stuff. And it concludes here with this game here, Romanich and Geller. Geller, the bête noire of Bobby Fischer. He caused him a lot of trouble over the years until Fischer finally gained revenge, I think in the early 1970s, before he played in the candidates matches. But there are certain players who give other players a lot of trouble. Carey's didn't have any trouble with Tal apparently. He had a significant plus score against him. But Tal did give a lot of other players quite a lot of trouble, there's no doubt about that. Talking here about chess robots, and here we have one. Perhaps you could regard this as a sort of a forerunner of the technological explosion. I remember in the mid-1970s, the Scottish international master David Levy, he spoke of one day that a chess computer would beat the very best human player, and so it proved with was it Deep Blue against Kasparov, and now of course we have Stockfish and AlphaZero. So he proved to be right in his opinion on that. This is a very interesting riddle here as well of the chess robot, and like it says, it's a theoretical position. The black king is mated after it is driven into one of the corners of the white bishop's colour. So, in other words, there. And this is not quite simple. Whatever the position, our robot does this in a matter of seconds. So, like all computers, they can calculate millions of anything in seconds. They can process it oh so quickly, it's unbelievable. And in less than 35 moves, and that is the solution. So for anybody who wants to take a screenshot of this and see if they can figure it out before they look at the solution, there we have it. All-time gems here, they are touching on 3 great Russian players. Alexander Petrov, who lived mainly in the 19th century, one of his games. And Mikhail Chigorin, of course. And of course, we can't overlook Alexander Alekhine, the first Russian world champion, like it puts it there. And there are games of them all. The game that, of course, is of primary interest possibly to many chess players is Bogolyubov against Alekhine, Hastings 1922. When I was a kid, this game was put across as being the greatest game of chess ever played, because it was a game that Alekhine simply had to win in order to secure first prize at Hastings, and he did win it, and with a defence, the Dutch defence, that he didn't generally employ. So, in fact, it's not annotated by Alekhine, but there is reference to Alekhine's thoughts as he was playing through this game. It's always better if you can have annotations by the players themselves, because they're looking at the game as they're playing it, rather than somebody coming along and then giving their opinion, like the late David Bronstein, who drew a championship match with Botvinnik in 1950. He was asked once to annotate a game, and he asked the person, how long is it that I have to annotate? Oh, in about 3 days. And Bronstein said, you must be joking. I couldn't annotate this in a month. So it proves that you do need a lot of time to get things right. All this rushing and herring around is all very well and good, but mistakes inevitably will be made. Like it points out just here, the exclamation mark here, as elsewhere, is Alekhine's. So he is in a way commenting on this. This game, like Alekhine pointed out in his book, My Best Games of Chess 1908 to 1923, did not receive any Brilliancy Prize award because there were no Brilliancy Prizes awarded at Hastings 1922. But if it had been in place, then he certainly would have secured another first Brilliancy Prize, because it's quite incredible what takes place during the final stages of it. I shan't spoil it for you, but just to say that there are quite a few queens floating around. It is a game worth playing over, and I'll just concentrate on it just for a moment there. Again, for anybody who wants to play this over. And what we have at the end is the gentleman I. Romanov, who is a candidate of science history at Moscow University. He notes here the creative approach to chess established by the founding fathers of the Russian school was developed, enriched and raised to a new height by Soviet grandmasters and masters. The best testimony to that is the current successes scored by Soviet chess players in the world arena. So that is a very impressive game. In fact, though, the game that I like best of Alekhine's is his against Sultan Khan at Bern 1932, where it is quite unbelievable. This game is available online, and the gentleman who's annotating it extols the virtue of every move of Alekhine's, because for such a lengthy period of play, it looks as though Sultan Khan has Alekhine by the throat. And then Alekhine simply replies, and you think to yourself, he doesn't have him by the throat at all. It's now the other way, but then Sultan Khan turns it. It's a game which I think is incredible in the sense that I don't think Sultan Khan made any obvious mistake in it, and yet he loses. So anyone that wants to look that one up, I would recommend it. This is an interesting article here, Capablanca and the Boy in the Corner. It essentially touches on Capablanca's 3 visits to the Soviet Union, and he won the Moscow tournament, I believe in 1936. I think I have either 1935 or 1936. But he was on one of his visits to the Soviet Union. He played a simultaneous exhibition, and he was subsequently asked. Let me see if we can get the word in here. Yes, Capablanca came to the Soviet Union 3 times. An episode during his last visit in 1936 is described below. Right now, in the simultaneous exhibition, Kappa was, at the end of it, asked which player impressed him the most. And here he says, when I was asked after the exhibition which game I thought had been the best, I unhesitatingly replied, the game played by the 12-year-old boy from that corner. And this took place in the Kiev Palace of Young Pioneers. Essentially, Kappa came to the board and made a move that he thought would finish off his opponent. And of course, he then went around the other boards. When he came back to that boy in the corner, the boy had made a move, and it effectively caused Kappa's eyebrows to be raised, and he had to think rather longer than he thought he would. And this happened several times, and that's why he was so impressed. And that's why he was impressed with the Soviet School of Chess, because he's thinking here, I remember when I was 12, and I didn't have any Soviet School of Chess. But this kid is very fortunate, isn't he? He's clearly a talented player. Imagine how talented I'd have been if I'd had the benefit of the Soviet School of Chess. Yes, Jose, you would have been, wouldn't you? Chess stamps. commemorating certain Soviet anniversaries. There's one here of Mikhail Chigrin. And this is very interesting here, some comments from certain members of the Soviet school. This gentleman here, Herman Lamokhin, who is a hero of socialist labor, building worker. This is his comment. I don't know how old this gentleman is. This was in, of course, February 1977, so he'd clearly been at least a boy when Alekhine was at his height, because what he says is, I was deeply impressed by my meeting with Alexander Alekhine, the greatest player of all time. The meeting took place on the stage of the Gogol Theatre in Moscow, where Grandmaster Alexander Kotov's play White and Black is running. So, high praise indeed. Is he right? He may well be. Alekhine, for my money, at his best is probably as good as you can get, although I always favour Paul Morphy and Capablanca and Kasparov and Fischer and latterly Carlsen. But I think from the combinative genius point of view, he probably could be regarded as good as they come. He may have had equals, but he did not have any superiors, is one way of looking at it. And so, if we round this off by just having a look at a few interesting chess pieces. And this is a knight in ivory, 13th century, Novgorod, which is a province in Russia. Porcelain chess pieces of the 18th century here. And this is Philidor. In fact, it's Alexander Petrov. A book by the first Russian master Alexander Petrov entitled The Game of Chess. His appearance is so much like Philidor's. Interesting. And it brought into systematized order with an appendix of the games of Philidor, so it is touching on right and commentaries on them. So it's Petrov commenting on Philidor in 1824. Petrov presented a critical analysis of the great French player André Philidor. Right, so I think really we can round this off by just having a look at this picture here. Two players at the board, pages from history. And the painting in the background is of the old Russian print, evidently depicts Sadko, hero of a Russian folk epic poem, setting out on a distant voyage to play chess with the king of the underwater world. Isn't that very interesting? So there you are, that's it. That definitely rounds off this USSR series. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed reacquainting myself with this and acquainting myself with it, because like I've pointed out in a few previous videos, I didn't really have the time years ago to go through it. And I have managed to find the time, and I've certainly gone through it now. And that is it. So enjoy your chess. Keep trying the puzzles, because that is one of the best ways to develop your skill, looking for similarities in your actual games that have cropped up in the puzzles, and you can save a lot of time on the clock if you are familiar with particular lines and ideas and that, and hopefully it will get you to manage the clock a little bit better than I've ever managed it. I did have problems with it for years, and I probably still would have, so at least presenting something like this, you're not on the clock, and that has to be a good thing. So keep enjoying your chess, and The very best of luck to everyone in chess and everything else, and goodbye for now.